Hello, good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you're watching this, and welcome to episode 11 of Painting with Stephen. So, I have done this in a different format. I've actually recorded me painting the acrylic layers as well. So, the reason I haven't been doing this originally is because I've almost seen it as an extension of the underpainting. But the more I'm developing this technique for myself, and the more the more detail I'm adding in with the acrylics, and the more important the acrylic layers are actually becoming to the final result, I thought, do you know something? I need to add in the acrylics as well, and my process while painting in acrylics. Now, up until very, very recently, I haven't had a lot of experience with painting with acrylics, but I've got to say, the combination of acrylics and oils is really something that I'm loving. And what I'm definitely finding is I feel like the fast drying ability of acrylics, coupled with the extreme layering you can do so quickly with them, is really lending itself very well to a lot of the detail work that I want to achieve with these 2 to 3 layer paintings. So right now, my process tends to be staining the canvas in some form of umber, either raw umber, burnt umber, whatever, with acrylics. Then letting that dry, then sketching out a sketch of what I want to do, and then going in with acrylic layers, and then painting oils for my final layer, just to add a bit of drama, a bit of sort of brightness, the texture that we all know and love with oils, really just to give it that final je ne sais quoi, just to add a little bit of magic to the painting. But to be perfectly honest with you, I am really loving the combination of the mediums. Now, let's talk about what I'm actually doing. As you can see, I'm now doing this castle. That's not actually what I'm going to call this painting. Redoubt, let's say. And I'm actually using a quill. I've been doing this a lot. If you watch my previous episodes in Finkel's Cave, you should see the weird and wonderful tools that you can actually use to paint. I'm using a quill that a friend bought me years ago that came with a calligraphy set, and that I'm using right there almost as a palette knife is a letter opener from the very same set, and it really was very, very awesome to use with my Finkel's Cave acrylic layers in episode 10, just to get that textured effect with the acrylics, which is something that I always sort of associated with oils. But I'm getting some really cool textured effects with the acrylics also, so I'm happy. I'm really, really happy with how the acrylic layers are turning out. So using a letter opener, using a quill, using a mixture of raw umber, Paynes Grey, and just your average titanium white acrylic paints. That's pretty much all the colours that I use for my rocky colours when I paint acrylic. But yeah, as you can see, this will grow arms and legs. I mean, it's actually a tiny canvas. It's a baby canvas, and although it's a small canvas, there's a lot of detail work in this painting. So you know, yeah, again, I'm very happy with the fact that I did so much of it in acrylics to begin with, because I feel like if I had tried to do this in oils, it just would not have worked as well, because of the fact that I was able to sort of go take a break, come back, let layers dry, paint again, paint again, paint again. That really was so effective when it came to Finkel's Cave, for example. I was just like, yeah, you know, I'm gonna do most of this in acrylics, do the heavy lifting with acrylics, then come in with oils for the final layer just to spruce everything up. The keen eye might notice that this is a take compositionally on a John Constable work. Now, it's of course not a copy of John Constable, it's simply sort of roughly similar to a work he did. And you know, I think I'm going to be reinterpreting a lot of you know, compositions of, you know, great landscape painters that came before me, but it's more the way I look for composition, you know, compositional inspiration, is I do this thing where I essentially go, okay, what is the vision I have in my head? Because usually the scenes that I paint are from imagination, so I go, what do I actually want to see here, right? Then I go and I look for inspiration. So, you know, yeah, okay, see with a lot of my silhouetted work and a lot of my previous fantasy works, I literally just make it all up from scratch. But with something like this, I like to go and I like to look for inspiration. So that's when, you know, I'll look for photographs and you know, just sort of ideas to try and actually jog some compositional ideas, some inspiration. But, and I think this is really the point that I want to get across here when I'm talking about going back to old landscape paintings for inspiration. The difference between a photograph and a painting and what works in both is gigantic. There is a massive seismic gaping ravine between those two art forms, and if you do both, like, I mean, I love photography myself, I'm also a painter, you know that a lot of the time a composition for one will not lend itself sorry, there's a fly in the room, will not lend itself to the other. Now, here's the thing, when you're doing something like looking for inspiration for an oil painting, so let's say you have a sort of idea in your imagination of what you want this to be, and then you're going, okay, so how am I going to achieve this? So then you look back to previous landscape painters that have inspired you, and you go, okay, let's go and do this, and this, pick from them. Okay, the reason that you should be going back to landscape painters is because they have made a composition that works for a painting, okay, and they have laid everything out to lend itself to the medium of painting. That is a very, very, very important distinction. So even if it's from imagination, if you're taking inspiration from, say, for example, architectural motifs, skies, rocks, land masses. Look for paintings. In saying that, of course, where's the fun in just copying what someone else did? Add some of your own shit in there, well, I shouldn't swear, but add some of your own takes of these ideas. For example, see the Redoubt, that's what I'm going to call it, in the middle. John Constable's. It's totally different colour. Doesn't have the little window on the right. It doesn't have like the sort of textured look that I'm adding to it. Well, it does actually, sort of, to be fair, but I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is, add your own slant to these ideas, change the colours up, go and take a sky from somewhere else, that you've got in your head, and then, superimpose it onto the motif or the composition of another. Here's also, I think, a very important thing about the psychological aspect of what's going on here. When you're taking inspiration from others, it still has to come from you. Now, if you're not an imaginative person, and you're more sort of mechanical, methodical in your approach to painting, then you could maybe just take a reference image and just go for that, and all of a sudden you have a great painting. But someone like me, that doesn't tend to work that well, in the sense that the reason I paint is to create things that I have imagined. So if I'm imagining ruins and towers and lost, forgotten worlds and all this sort of stuff, I like to imagine that it's in a world of its own. I don't tend to like to go and paint, for example, here's the Leaning Tower of Pisa. If I was to use the Leaning Tower of Pisa as an architectural motif, it would simply be to sort of create a schema that the viewer can then tap into, but is still coming from a place of imagination. Now, I don't know if that makes any sense, but I guess what I'm trying to say is, for example, the Romantics, right? They harkened back to medieval, medieval motifs, medieval symbolism. So, just like, for example, you had in medieval Europe the harkening back to, the great antiquity, ancient artists that came before them. I think, you're trying to get people to tap into a certain understanding they have in their head about something else. Like, for example, in the Hudson River School, Thomas Cole, when he was painting his incredible work, the Course of Civilizations, it was a series of, 5 paintings. He used the motif of the classical world, right? He used the motif of, for example, a Greco-Roman civilization. The reason he did that was because in the West, we tend to associate grand ideas of art, culture, literature, philosophy with Greco-Roman classical antiquity. And he understood that. And so he was trying to prove a philosophical, theological point with his paintings. And those sort of motifs, those points that he was using these paintings to illustrate, they could have used other civilizations, but he used that intentionally to create an impression on you as the viewer, because you have this motif in your head, you have this this understanding of what he means, when he's talking about these grand ideas of civilization. And I think that's sort of what, for example, is going on here. I'm trying to hearken back to more of a medieval, feudal society, civilization, the remnants of a lost kingdom, of maybe like a watchtower that is now fallen into ruin, of a kingdom that was once thriving and is now no longer. This is more the motifs that I want to get across with this painting. If I wanted to get across, grand ideas of civilization, I would maybe go in a more Greco-Roman direction. Not saying that European civilization didn't produce incredible things and continue to innovate well past, our ancient Greco-Roman pagan days, but you understand what I'm trying to say, or at least I hope, that certain symbols illustrate different things, and so if you're trying to, for example, create this idea of loneliness and isolation, tend to go for a more modern motif, like a big city, a big maybe a noir style, maybe like almost like a 1920s 1930s New York or Chicago, something maybe Hopper-esque, like Edward Hopper when he painted Nighthawks. I think this is, if you're painting from imagination, this is the way to approach it. Sometimes, even if the point you're trying to illustrate is entirely yours and is unique and comes from a place of imagination, that doesn't always necessarily mean that you should then go and try and just do it all yourself and try and create the layout of the composition entirely yourself, and all the architecture yourself, and do all of this, and all the heavy lifting yourself. Use the motifs that history has given us, okay? I mean, look at any fantasy writer, okay? J.R.R. Tolkien, right? What did he do? J.R.R. Tolkien looked back to the mythology of Scotland, the mythology of England, the mythology of Ireland, of Finland, and he took it and he reworked it, refashioned it, molded it into something that was unique to him, because he was trying to tell a unique message by utilizing the symbolism and motifs of the cultures before him and his own ancestors. Now, this is the thing. This is, a lot of the time art is actually about collective memory, isn't it? And it's about, passing down ideas of, grandeur, success, failure, love, hate, down to the next generations, so that then other artists can take from that and contort it, change it, depending on what they want to do. But I'll stop rambling on about that. Save that for a philosophy video or something, because I know this is a painting video, and I want to make my philosophy and history videos that I am going to be doing very soon. In fact, I've worked on an introduction for that section of the channel, which is, I'm so excited to get into all that stuff. I've got so many ideas, but yeah, I think I'm going to be doing that content a lot more rigidly. Obviously, this is a sort of shooting the breeze, informal type chat done in one take while you watch me paint. But realistically, with when I'm trying to prove a philosophical point, or trying to cite a historical point, I want it to be a lot more regimented. I want to have it properly sourced. I want to utilize reading, as in my readings, in order to make the video more interesting in that way. So it's going to be a very different layout, and I'm very excited for that as well, just to experiment with different layouts and what works and what doesn't work. Let me just quickly talk about something practical about the painting. Maybe the viewers watching this, going, thank God for that, for fuck's sake, but shut up. But yeah, no, this is actually a really interesting point about greens, and I think it actually taps into something I've said maybe previously about and going back to the idea of schemas, really, in the psychological sense, because I think a lot of beginner artists are very, very guilty, in going, right, grass is green, the sky is blue, trees are brown, right, rocks are grey. It all fits into the schemas in your head. That's the way it's all organised. But no, that's not so. You have to take each example as it comes. Colours in reality are usually very, very muddied, aren't they? And you can find browns in the sky, you can find browns in the sea, you can find all these muddied colours in the grass. One of the things that I've always yearned to paint is the rugged highland landscape of my native Scotland, but in a fantasy way. Not this is Sutherland, but taking inspiration from Sutherland and going, right, let's make something out of this, put a castle in there, or put like a cool sort of ruin in there that didn't belong there before, sort of experiment with that. But one of the things that's always held me back is historically I have struggled with how to do greens and browns and sort of subdued yellows in that way properly. But I think that the more you develop as a painter, the more you start to understand and realise that, for example, there's the one thing that you do not want to do when you're painting, for example, your greens, is go in just with the same green, green, everywhere, grass, green. No. I think a good rule of thumb is, firstly, mix your greens. Okay, don't take it out of a tube. Mix your greens. Once you've mixed your green with whatever yellow and blue you're using, create like 6 different color variations of the green, right? And then whenever you're utilizing a green in a painting, place all of those greens beside each other. For example, in your grass, right? Make sure they're all in there, so that the viewer's eye doesn't just see one, monotone colour, one shade of green, because it's boring on the eye, it looks bad. It just doesn't look good. If you're looking at what I'm developing here, I'm adding in yellows, I'm adding in browns, I'm adding in greens of all sorts of different sort of colours. I'm adding in greys for rocks. I'm adding in, you know, just little bumps, little sort of, you know, indications. And remember, this is not a big canvas, so, you know, it's not like there's a lot of space to manoeuvre. But with the space you do have, you want to utilise it by, you know, adding in varieties of colour everywhere you can. And I'm using the letter opener as a palette knife, or for palette knife sort of style techniques. You know, a little bit, you know, to give a little bit of texture. But yes, my rocks have browns, my rocks have greens, my rocks have, you know, like little indications of moss, little indications of dirt, little indications of dead things, right? That's what reality would be like. Not that I'm saying that this is like reality, because this is a stylized, sort of romanticized image. Because, you know, if I wanted to see reality, I'd go and take a camera and I'd take a photo of something. That's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to create a sort of romanticized, interesting, sort of moody, dynamic image that's actually going to evoke something. And evocation is the most important thing with painting. If someone wants to just see something, they can go out and see it. But you want to evoke an emotion, or you want to evoke and provoke an emotion. That's the thing. So, just quickly here, I'm adding a little castle in the background. Just again, well, that is from imagination. It's just a little land, you know, just a little landform from imagination, just a little castle form from imagination. Using the quill to, you know, add little indications here and there. And this is all still in acrylic. Okay, all still in acrylic. You know, just while I'm ranting, because I have more time here. And I'm not so, I mean, you know, if anybody actually wants to tell me, you know, like, if this is too long with the acrylics, you know, and it's boring and you just want to go straight to the oil painting, let me know. But, you know, like, I just thought I'd add the acrylics in just so that everybody could see the process. But yeah, like, I think it's the plan here, right, is with the trees that are sort of like two different shades of green. I planned to add a third darker shade of green with oils. My darkest greens always look better when they're oils. I don't know why. I just prefer the look of dark green oils. But yeah, basically adding in these little indications with oil, or sorry, with acrylic, I should say. And yeah, like just sort of like continuing to add my sort of like dirtied greens and browns to make these hills slightly further away. Yeah, but one thing that always annoys me while I'm ranting on here about sort of making these painting videos, well, it doesn't annoy me, I actually love making them, but it's like the fact that I always wear like rubbish, sort of crap clothing, because I don't want to get them dirtied with paint. But then, you know, I sort of feel a bit like a bum whenever I go on the camera. You know, but then at the same time, you know, that's just the way the cookie crumbles, isn't it? You know, maybe I'm a bit like Whistler, you know, a bit of a dandy or whatever, but no. But anyway, I think yeah, I think one thing that I genuinely do love making these videos, and I think I was actually thinking about this before I came on. I really love just the not only do I love just the idea of actually getting my paintings out there and sort of taking part in the community aspect of it and trying to find other like-minded artists and people that actually care about art, but I think also to a massive extent it's so useful for yourself. So useful for yourself in the sense of there's been paintings that I have painted for YouTube that I have not been particularly happy with, but I've been forced to put them out anyway because I promised I was going to release one a week. And you know, that sounds in a way almost like, oh shit, like why is that a good thing? You know, why would you want to put yourself in that position? Well, the reason I would want to put myself in that position is because I personally feel like that is, it's great in so many ways. It's a learning curve for you. You can look back on it and go, yeah, this didn't work, that didn't work. But it also more just forces you to paint every week, forces you to try and get a workout every week, you know, forces you out of your comfort zone. And it also, you know, means that, see, if someone one day does stumble upon that painting but they love it, you know, that means they got to enjoy something that you would never have put out there if you had let your perfectionism or sort of self-doubt get in the way of releasing that into the world. And at the end of the day, you know, you are your own harshest critic most of the time. So yeah, sometimes I do feel like that really is one of the main advantages of you know, actually just forcing yourself to get things out once a week. Let me just quickly interrupt myself and talk about what's going on here, because I've started the oil layers. This is now oil, and I thought, do you know something, I'm just going to go crazy with this guy. I'm going to experiment, right? So I put some transparent red oxide in there, and I also put some really sort of muddied blue, you know, with my traditional Umber and Paynes Grey mix. And then I used this weird roller thing that I bought originally for cold wax, and I just decided, you know something, I've never used this, I've never taken it out of the packet, let's see what it looks like, you know, when I, you know, use it in the sky. Didn't really like it. That's my, you know, obviously I know that that's probably not how to use it, and I'll find a use for it somewhere, but in this context, didn't like it, so I just stopped using it. But then one problem is, because I was originally going to go for a very thick and pastel look in the sky, I sort of added too much paint, probably, from, you know, because obviously I tend to paint with oils, I tend to paint quite minimalistically in terms of, you know, like the amount that I put on there until I get to my texture stuff, like for example waves. However, with this particular piece here, yeah, I feel like the sky just really did not benefit from that. You know, and don't get me wrong, I love how the sky turned out. I'm not saying that the sky turned out bad, but I basically then just had to strip a lot of that paint back by wiping it off with you know, kitchen roll, and that, you know, but obviously that's part of the process too, you know, because you try things that work, you know, you try things that don't work, you experiment, and a lot of the time, you know, you also sometimes just want to strip things back, blend things out, retexture them. Doesn't matter, just do do whatever needs to be done. Once you've learnt the techniques that need to be learnt to sort of just go off and paint, you go off and paint until you find something that works for you and that you like. See, with this, right, because we're using an umber layer, underlayer I should say, that can really work to your advantage. I was actually just watching another painter on YouTube, Francis McCarthy. I was watching one of his videos just today actually, and he was talking about, like, it's timeless. It's a timeless technique, utilizing umber in landscapes as your underlayer. Pretty much every single old master did it. Every landscape, and so many landscape painters do it in different ways, because you can go in a la prima and paint wet on wet, and you can go in and you can, add in umber layers and then paint wet on wet over those umber layers and let it all amalgamate, or you can do what I'm doing and let it dry, so that, if you want to, like, let it shine through again and rub it all off, you'll have that umber shining through. But, make no mistake, umber is an incredible tool, an incredible colour, just to add a sort of just atmospheric, earthy tone to all of your works. It's brilliant. And I decided again, I still wanted this guy to just be fun, so if you've watched my previous videos, I tend to go in with fan brush. I blend out with the fan brush a lot when I'm doing clouds to get a sort of more subdued cloud effect. And then sometimes I'll also add in a little bit of textured impasto work also, but a lot of the time I like my clouds to be very subdued. But this time I literally just went in and mucked the paint around with a palette knife, and sometimes I like doing that too. It works. It creates some cool effects. Let the paint break on your palette knife and just go crazy in the sky. Just go absolutely crazy. Move paint around. See what works, see what doesn't work. Realistically, this is another thing that I think I'm really enjoying, okay, about having acrylic layers painted first. Because if this was done in oil, okay, it would be fucking chaos. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't swear. It would be chaos. You'd be blending out and it would be slippy, slidey. The castle could be gone, everything else could be gone. But when you are painting with acrylic layers first, letting it dry, then painting oil, you have the beautiful sort of saturation and texture of oil, but also with the safety and security of a dried acrylic layer. And you can do all sorts of fun things with that. You can scumble, you can create mist effects by putting the oil over the acrylic, and if you look at my castle right at the very back behind the redoubt, right in the very, very vague distance, you can see that I've done exactly that. I've covered the castle and the subsequent landmass that it's on with my sky colour, so that it looks like the atmosphere of the sky has covered that landmass, and it's blended it back out, like it's blended it almost into the sky itself. Now, if this was oils, that couldn't be done in a week. That's just a fact, right? It would be months and months and months before, anything like that could be achieved. So please keep that in mind when you are thinking about doing stuff like this, because you know, moving paint around, going crazy, that's all very well and good when you have the security blanket of, you know, dry layers. But if you don't, be very cautious about the fact that, you know, you could be erasing some of the work that you've done. Okay, it's so easy to do that, and I've obviously been an oil painter for a lot longer than I've ever used acrylics, and trust me, I know I know how easy it is for that to happen. So yeah, approaching the end of the scene, and you know, like tying it all together. As you can see, I added a little choppy sea in, used the palette knife to give some textured wave effects, brought it to that sort of shore there, and yeah, that's the final result, and I'm pretty happy with it. You know, yeah, I really like how it turned out, actually. I actually added a little bit of sand colour to the bottom, but I didn't add that in. You know, silly me, didn't take a photo of that. But yeah, do you know something? I'm so happy with how this painting turned out. And thank you for joining me. So yeah, thank you, and I'll catch you for episode 12. Goodbye, and see you soon.